This is a story about getting out of my comfort zone as a miniature painter and then ending up ruining half the project on the part that I was too comfortable with. Hey guys, welcome back to Black Magic Craft. This week's episode is sponsored by the Dragon Trappers Lodge, and when they first reached out to me to do a video using one of their 3D printable minis, I almost said no. Because while their models are absolutely beautiful, the theme for the month of August is heavily inspired by Japan, and it's the type of thing that I wouldn't normally gravitate towards. I chose to go for it though. I wanted to get outside of my comfort zone and push myself to work on something that was really different than my personal taste would normally dictate. I also wanted to use this as an excuse to try for the first time painting fur patterns on a mini. Something that I've never done and have always been pretty intimidated to try. So I picked Kai, a catfolk monk that would force me to paint with a tiger fur pattern. These models are really cool in the fact that they come with multiple options for their hands and weapons and like spell effects. This guy had 4 different options to choose from for each hand, and I wasn't sure which I would want to use, so I printed out a couple of them. Initially I thought that I would use the cool fire spell option, but in the end I decided to go with one of them holding the weapon and one of them just being a clenched fist. I thought these two best highlighted the really dynamic pose of this sculpt. And despite being really small pieces, they printed out really well and were modeled with keyed slots to make assembly really easy. There was of course some small seams and gaps that needed filling, and I opted to use some really fast setting 2-part epoxy putty for this. This isn't a hobby product, this is something that you'd find in the adhesive section of your big box hardware store, and it's meant for small repairs. It's great because it dries rock hard and is sandable in just a few minutes. Way better than waiting several hours for milliput or green stuff to cure. But the trade-off is that you have almost no working time. You only got like 2 or 3 minutes to get your piece done. I opted to use rattle can primers because they also dry a lot faster than the Vallejo surface primer that I often use, and I really wanted to move on to painting right away. I was really excited and nervous to tackle the tiger fur. I've never done this before. I have no experience with it, and I haven't even watched any tutorials on it, so I just sort of guessed my way through the whole process. I picked an orange that seemed suitably toned for tiger fur, thinned it, and applied it with an airbrush. I was patient and did several light coats. The Zenithal highlight primer that I had applied created natural shadows and highlights, and it worked pretty well with the orange that was not that opaque and, as some other colors might be. Now for the fun part. Adding the white underbelly fur. I had absolutely no idea how to do this effectively with a brush, so I didn't. I just continued with the airbrush. With my PSI set very low and a very gentle pressure on the trigger, I applied the white to the appropriate areas. Even with rudimentary airbrush skills, this was actually an incredibly easy and effective process. I was even feeling confident enough at this point to continue and block out the white parts of his clothing using the airbrush. Coloring within the line, so to speak, on very small areas is not something I try very often with airbrush. And I think I've been doing a disservice to myself by avoiding it. While I didn't get it perfect, I was able to do a pretty effective job, and it saved me a lot of time. At this point though, I did need to move on to normal brush painting, and the first step would be to correct the areas of airbrush overspray. This really wasn't that much to do, and frankly, I was feeling pretty damn pleased with how he was looking even at this early stage. I could then move on to blocking out all the other main colors with a base coat. I do not have steady hands. In fact, I fight against some rather strong tremors. Every bit of shaky hand painting advice I've heard, be it elbows on the table, arms against a desk, or even the rubber band method, well, none of them work for me personally. What does work for me though, is this one specific painting position. If I sit back, relax my body, and keep my hand holding the model firmly against my chest, along with my forearm of my painting arm, I'm able to mitigate my shakes almost entirely. This position is a lifesaver for me, and it's something I recommend you try if you also struggle with shakes. It might not work for you, but it's worth a shot. He was looking pretty decent with just the major colors blocked in, but it was time for that big, intimidating part of the paint job, the stripes. I was really nervous about this because I'd never done it before and because fixing errors would be kind of difficult as the orange and white had been airbrushed on. So matching touch-ups with a brush could be really hard, but I forced myself to just relax and get into it. And honestly, it wasn't that hard. My stripes may not be entirely accurate to real life, but I think in the end, they sell the idea well enough and certainly look good enough from a few feet away that you usually view a mini. I think if I were to do this a few more times, I could probably bang out some pretty believable animal patterns. Eyes, however, are another story. They are always really tough, and they were especially tough on this guy, but I did get them kind of decent. I really wanted to put a wash on basically every part of the model, mostly to get into the recesses of all the color transitions and to tone down some of the brighter colors. My worry though was how it would make the fur look. I wasn't so worried about the orange parts, but was justifiably concerned about the white areas, as it would be hard to bring back up the highlights where there were black stripes. In hindsight, I suppose I could have left the stripes until after the wash stage. Now I could go back into each color and simply bring up the highlights and mitigate the dirty staining effect that the washes can have. I actually think that on this model, I would have been better served thinning my washes, but I'm still pretty content with how it worked out. My highlighting process is pretty basic. I go in with the color I used for the base coat and hit all the highest areas. Then I lighten that color 1 or 2 times and progressively make the highlights smaller. I don't really do too much blending. This is really easy with colors like the vibrant blue on the pants, but it's a lot more tricky on things like whites and reds. With red in particular, adding white to the highlights just makes them look pink. On this guy, I tried using some vibrant orange to brighten it up, along with just a little bit of white, and I think this worked better than just adding white. But it still has that kind of pink highlight effect. The fur was kind of tricky, again because of the stripes, but thankfully it didn't need too much. A lot of the highest points were actually in areas that were just orange. In the white areas, I essentially repainted the white and had to redo the stripes, but this honestly wasn't that big of a deal. He looked good, but his eyes were looking especially derpy. I attempted to fix them, but kept making them worse and worse. It took me about 20 attempts to get it back to looking just decent. So while I fudge around with that, let me tell you a bit more about the sponsor. The Dragon Trappers Lodge is a monthly Patreon-based service for getting 3D printable miniatures for your tabletop games. For only $10 a month, you get access to a set of unique models with a different theme every month. The running theme through every month, however, are the dragons and the dragon trappers. Each month, there is a unique, gargantuan scale dragon model included, and the characters are the dragon trappers. The models are less focused on generic monsters or hordes, and are more focused on characters. And in terms of the monster or dragons that are included, they also provide 5th edition D&D stat blocks every month. When you join up, you get a great welcome pack, a coupon code for a discount for their previous models that are sold on myminifactory.com. And for 3D printing rookies like myself, all the models come with pre-supported options, making them drag and drop and super easy. I'll put a link to their Patreon in the video description so you can check them out and get more details. I didn't manage to get the eyes to a point that I loved, but I got them to a point where I was comfortable just giving up and saying good enough. I was really anxious and excited to move on to making the nice scenic base, and I didn't want to work on the eyes anymore. Now, I loved the pose of this mini and how it actually looked on the stick that I was using for painting, so I figured I'd make a base that had him balancing on a little wood post. I cut a piece of MDF, but opted to not go for a rectangle. I love creating bases that change or slice through the viewer's perspective, and I thought this shape would be really interesting. I sealed the edges of the MDF with super glue because I had plans of using leftover gift cards to veneer the edges. I realized quickly that I made the base longer than a gift card, so I had to quickly remedy that. Thankfully, the cutoff was also usable to build up the height on one side. My plan was to make a little shoreline and have them standing on a wood post in some water. Using the old gift card, I started cutting up the frame, which would work as sort of a dam for the modeling compound later, and create a really durable finish for the outside where I didn't have to worry about things shrinking. Unfortunately, I realized after the first piece that despite feeling like plastic, Amazon gift cards are in fact just paper. Before continuing down that bad path, I just ripped it off and found a different card that was actually plastic. I really took my time with this. I got the shapes perfect and I got the seams really well bonded, blended, and sanded. Super glue, baking soda, and sanding. This gave me a frame that I was really content with. I was really pleased with myself for putting in that effort here and excitedly moved on to the modeling compound. I used the stuff from Geek Gaming, which is very similar to Sculptamold but actually dries harder and faster. With my frame in place, it was really easy to fill and shape the tiny coastline. And while it was wet, I made a small indentation for the post and glued it in place. And when I printed out the Mini, I also printed out the included base that they had designed for it, not knowing at that point how I'd be finishing the model. Since I was doing this big scenic base, it wouldn't get used, but I really loved that little bamboo shoot detail and wanted to make use of them. I gotta say, I'm impressed both with the pre-supported files they gave me and with my Anycubic Photon for printing out these tiny bamboo branches and leaves without any issue. It's really remarkable what we can do with at-home printing if you stop and think about it. If time wasn't a factor on this project, I probably would have gone and printed a whole bunch of these to just cover the whole area, and that would have looked really cool. There really wasn't much to paint. I'd be doing full ground cover, so it was just a matter of painting the wood post and the bamboo before moving on. I wanted to make use of some of the Geek Gaming base-ready materials on this one. They're awesome because they don't require any painting. They just look good as is. I picked one that I thought would look best for a Japanese beach and got to work covering the base in the fast-drying glue. This glue is super sticky and stays tacky forever, so I was really careful not to get it on the edges. After applying the base-ready ground covers and sands, I hit it with Scenic cement to lock it all in. I was so damn excited about how this was looking. Honestly, I was totally thrilled. It really was gonna look like a little slice out of real life. This satisfaction and excitement is what would make the next step's outcome so devastating. Once the base was dry, I prepared for the resin water pour. I took my time getting it really well masked off and damped, and I grabbed some resin. In the past, I would have used 5-minute epoxy for this, but it's pretty thick, and I remembered that I had some clear Smoothcast 325 on hand that I never ended up using for another project. I knew this would be way easier to pour and it would flow really nicely, so I opted to give it a go. But this is where I listened to my heart instead of my brain. My heart was saying, yeah man, go for it, it's gonna look awesome. But my brain was saying, hey man, you've never used this stuff before, so you should probably do a test pour. But my heart said, no man, screw it, just mix it up. Add in a few drops of wash to tinted. What could go wrong? And my brain said, yeah, but you don't know how this will react. Why don't you do just a tiny test first? I mean, it sets up in minutes. What have you got to lose? In the end, my stupid heart won out and told my brain to shut up. And I mixed in a few tiny drops of wash and just poured it onto my piece. What a massively stupid move. Well, this is why when you're working with materials or chemicals that you haven't really worked with before, you should probably test how they're going to interact with other things before using them on a piece that you put a lot of work into. I made the mistake of just winging it, and a lot of the time that's fine. This time, it was not fine. I've mixed paints and inks and these washes with 5-minute epoxy so many times and had no issue. And for some reason, I just thought it would be fine with this stuff. I suppose this is actually like a polyurethane, which reacts badly with water. It says polymethylene, polyphenol, whatever. These are chemicals, I don't know what they mean. It wasn't a reaction of the glue or anything on the base because the leftover stuff also reacted in the cup and it foamed up like crazy. It's pretty neat, actually. Could be cool for something else. This base is ruined, which is a shame because everything else about it turned out really nice. I don't have time now to redo this all over again, so I'm just gonna cut my losses, make a tiny little simple base for this guy, and call it. Yeah, lessons learned. I really did not have the heart nor the time to make that base all over again. So I just went with a very fast 1-inch base. I even used the post that he had already been on for painting and some more of the base ready ground cover, and within a few minutes I still ended up with a really nice display base. I greatly regret screwing up the bigger Scenic Base that I had put so much effort into, but in the end it wasn't for nothing. I learned some valuable lessons in the process. It was a great reminder that when you're using new materials on something really important, you should test them out first. And it made me realize that I may be able to use this failure in a controlled way in the future to make some kind of cool foamy effect. At the end of the day, this project was about painting that tiger model. And I'm really happy with how it turned out, and I'm pretty proud of myself for overcoming the intimidation to paint fur on a miniature. So what do you guys think? I hope you enjoyed living vicariously through my failures on this one, and I'm really happy that I was able to make those mistakes for you so that you don't have to. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a like and let me know in the comment section below. If you want to check out more of the cool models available from Dragon Trappers Lodge, I will put a link in the video description below to them so you can check them out, join up, and get some cool minis to do up yourself. If you want to pick up any tools or supplies for your own hobby needs, or you wonder what some of the stuff that I use regularly are, be sure to check out blackmagicraft.ca. There I've put together an essential equipment page that explains and links to most of the stuff that I use. If you enjoy these videos that I make every week and you want to help me keep making them for the community, this community that is growing at an alarming and amazing rate, the best way you can do that is by supporting the channel on Patreon. It's through that support that I'm able to dedicate my time, effort, and resources to these videos every week. And by joining the Black Magic Craft Fellowship, you can help me keep doing it. That's it for this week, guys. I will see you again next week. Cheers. I wonder if I can break this off and... No, man, this thing is solid. Oh, wait. Oh. Sweet. I can still use this. Win.